Novel The Loophole. Dedication. To the architects of deception, the masters of disguise, those who walk the tightrope between truth and fabrication, balancing precariously on the edge of exposure. This book is dedicated to you, the silent players in the grand theater of life, the ones who craft intricate narratives, weaving layers of illusion to conceal the vulnerabilities beneath. You, who know the seductive whisper of secrecy, the intoxicating power of control, and the chilling weight of a life lived in the shadows. This is for the high-powered executives who juggle clandestine affairs alongside million-dollar deals, their polished exteriors masking the turmoil within. For the brilliant lawyers who defend the guilty, their moral compasses spinning wildly, caught in the whirlwind of legal battles and personal betrayals. For the seemingly perfect spouses whose smiles hide a web of lies, their carefully constructed families built on foundations of deceit. To those who navigate the treacherous waters of double lives, juggling identities like a seasoned magician, concealing the truth with masterful skill, this book acknowledges the intricate dance between desire and consequence, the thrilling risk and the devastating fallout. It recognizes the quiet desperation of maintaining a facade, the constant fear of discovery, the gnawing uncertainty that shadows every moment. This is an exploration of the moral ambiguities that exist in the gray areas, where right and wrong intertwine, blurring the lines until they are indistinguishable. It's for the ones who understand the intoxicating allure of forbidden passions, the exhilarating rush of living on the edge, knowing that one wrong move could unravel it all. It celebrates the human capacity for both incredible deceit and profound loyalty, the paradoxical nature of a heart capable of both immense love and devastating betrayal. To the courageous souls who dare to challenge the status quo, to those who push boundaries and test limits, who navigate the labyrinthine corridors of power and deception, this book is a testament to your resilience, your strength, and your unwavering determination to survive, even when the stakes are impossibly high. You are the architects of your own destinies, the authors of your own narratives, and the masters of your own carefully constructed illusions. May this story resonate with the echoes of your own silent battles and the weight of your carefully guarded secrets. May it offer a glimpse into the heart of the darkness and the glimmer of hope that shines even in the deepest shadows. Chapter 1: The Double Life. The city lights of Chicago twinkled like a million fallen stars, reflected in the inky expanse of Lake Michigan. From her penthouse apartment, a breathtaking panorama unfolded before Sarah, a view that perfectly mirrored the facade of her life. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the majestic cityscape, showcasing the glittering spires and the endless expanse of water. The apartment itself was a testament to success, a haven of modern elegance furnished with exquisite taste. Neutral tones blended seamlessly with rich textures, creating an atmosphere of calm sophistication. Sculptures, strategically placed, added an air of artistic refinement, while carefully curated books lined the shelves, suggesting a life of intellectual pursuits. This was the carefully constructed image Sarah presented to the world, a picture of a successful lawyer, happily married to a devoted husband, a woman who seemed to possess it all. Mark, her husband, was everything a woman could want on paper. Handsome, successful, charming, with a disarming smile that could melt glaciers. He was the perfect complement to her high-powered career, the steady hand to her ambitious spirit. They hosted lavish parties in their penthouse, effortlessly mingling with the city's elite. Champagne flowed freely, laughter echoed off the polished marble floors, and the air buzzed with a sense of effortless glamour. Yet, beneath the surface of this flawless exterior, a subtle discontent simmered within Sarah. A gnawing emptiness, a yearning for something more, or perhaps something different. It was a quiet ache, easily masked by the bright lights and the constant whirl of her life. This discontent found its outlet in a clandestine affair with David, a charismatic colleague at her prestigious law firm. David was everything Mark wasn't, unpredictable, passionate, full of a reckless energy that both thrilled and terrified her. Their meetings were a stark contrast to the polished perfection of her life with Mark. They met in a dimly lit jazz club, tucked away in a hidden corner of the city, a place where smoky shadows obscured their rendezvous. The low thrum of the music, the clinking of glasses, the hushed conversations, all created an atmosphere of forbidden intimacy. The scent of expensive bourbon mingled with the perfume of illicit secrets. In this clandestine space, Sarah shed the polished facade she wore in the outside world, allowing herself to be vulnerable, to be real. Their relationship was a dance on a razor's edge, thrilling and dangerous. The stolen glances across crowded rooms, the furtive touches, the whispered conversations, each encounter a potent cocktail of exhilaration and fear. The risk, the secrecy, fueled their passion, creating an intensity that was both intoxicating and terrifying. David, with his tousled dark hair, intense eyes, and a smile that promised both adventure and danger, was a captivating force of nature. He saw through the carefully constructed image Sarah projected, recognizing the hidden anxieties and desires that lay beneath the surface. Their shared passion was a stark contrast to the carefully cultivated politeness of her marriage. He didn't expect perfection, he seemed to appreciate the inherent flaws that were hidden under layers of professionalism. The irony wasn't lost on Sarah. The meticulous planning that went into her double life was almost comical. She navigated two completely separate worlds with ease, compartmentalizing her life with the precision of a seasoned surgeon. The weekdays were filled with the cutthroat world of high-stakes litigation, where she wielded her intellect like a weapon, dismantling opposing arguments with surgical precision. The courtroom was her battlefield, her intellect her armor. She thrived in the intense pressure cooker of the legal world, where success came at a cost, where the stakes were always high. The weekends were for the clandestine meetings, the stolen moments of passion, and the careful cultivation of the illusion of marital bliss. Even her wardrobe reflected this duality. The sharp power suits of the office contrasted starkly with the flowing silks and sensual fabrics she wore for her secret rendezvous. The luxury of their penthouse, the view, the expensive art, all felt hollow sometimes. It wasn't that she didn't appreciate the success she had achieved. It was the emptiness that lurked beneath the surface. She had achieved everything she had set out to do, yet there was still a nagging sense of dissatisfaction. Perhaps it was the monotony of her relationship with Mark. Or perhaps it was the thrill of the forbidden, the intoxicating danger of her affair with David. It was a cocktail of emotions, complex and difficult to articulate, even to herself. She found solace in the quiet moments, in the stillness of the night, as she gazed out at the city lights, the image of David's face sometimes superimposed over the glittering skyline. The apartment, a symbol of her success, became a stage for a performance she was beginning to question. The meticulously placed furniture, the carefully chosen art, the luxurious fabrics, all elements in a carefully crafted performance designed to mask the turmoil that raged within her. The spaciousness that once represented freedom felt increasingly like a cage, mirroring the constriction she felt from the double life she led. The elegant dining room, where she and Mark shared quiet dinners, felt almost hostile, a stark reminder of the life she was leading, the facade she had so diligently constructed. Even the quiet moments in her penthouse, once her refuge, now held a disquieting sense of emptiness. The carefully chosen books, once a source of intellectual stimulation, now felt like props in a play she was growing tired of acting out. The city lights, once a source of inspiration, now felt like a cold, indifferent observer of her secret life, mirroring the detachment she was beginning to feel from herself. The contrast between the carefully constructed perfection of her public life and the reckless passion of her clandestine romance was becoming increasingly difficult to maintain. The cracks in the facade, once barely perceptible, were beginning to widen, threatening to expose the truth beneath. And as the cracks widened, so did the fear. The fear of exposure, the fear of losing everything she had worked so hard to achieve. This fear, this underlying anxiety, was becoming as constant a companion as the breathtaking city view from her window. The beautiful city was a witness, a silent observer of the unfolding drama, and Sarah knew, deep down, that the game couldn't last forever. The mahogany table in the courtroom felt cold beneath her fingertips. Sarah adjusted her impeccably tailored power suit, the crisp fabric a stark contrast to the nervous tremor she felt deep in her chest. Across the room, Mr. Harrison, her client, a man whose empire was built on calculated risk and even more calculated deceit, sat rigid, his face a mask of controlled anxiety. He was accused of embezzlement, a charge that threatened to dismantle his carefully constructed financial kingdom. The air in the courtroom hung thick with tension, a palpable energy that thrummed against Sarah's skin. She could feel the eyes of the jury on her, assessing, judging. The fluorescent lights seemed to amplify the pressure, turning the already sterile environment into a pressure cooker. This case, unlike others she had handled, felt different. The intricacies of financial fraud were familiar territory, but there was a deeper undercurrent, a sense of familiarity that sent shivers down her spine. The deceit, the carefully constructed lies, the hidden truths, they mirrored aspects of her own double life with a disconcerting precision. The man before her, outwardly successful and respected, was secretly leading a life built on deception, just as she was. The parallels were unnerving, a chilling reflection of her own precarious situation. Her professional life, usually a source of control and order, had become a warped mirror reflecting the chaos of her personal life. The prosecutor, a formidable woman named Ms. Davies, launched into her opening statement, her voice sharp and precise. She painted a picture of Harrison as a ruthless businessman, a man who prioritized profit over ethics, who had systematically defrauded his investors. Her words hung in the air, each one a carefully placed stone in a wall of accusation. Sarah watched her with a critical eye, noting the subtle inflections in her voice, the strategic pauses, the calculated use of dramatic effect. Davies was a skilled opponent, a worthy adversary. The courtroom, a battleground of legal strategies, felt like a reflection of Sarah's own internal conflict. The controlled chaos of the legal arena was a stark contrast to the carefully managed, almost suffocating order of her double life. Sarah's own opening statement was a carefully constructed counter-narrative. She presented Harrison as a victim of circumstance, a man who had made mistakes, but who was not inherently malicious. She spoke with quiet confidence, her voice measured and calm, her words precise and persuasive. She skillfully dismantled the prosecutor's arguments, pointing out flaws in their logic, highlighting inconsistencies in their evidence. Her legal expertise was her shield, protecting her client, and, in a way, protecting herself. The courtroom became a stage, and Sarah was the master performer, weaving a narrative of plausible deniability that hung precariously in the balance. The following days were a whirlwind of testimony, cross-examination, and legal maneuvering. Sarah skillfully navigated the treacherous waters of evidence and counter-evidence, dissecting witness statements, exposing inconsistencies, and meticulously building a defense. She was ruthless, efficient, and utterly compelling in her presentation. Her performance was a captivating display of legal prowess, leaving the jury captivated and her adversary visibly frustrated. The pressure was immense, but she handled it with the steely grace of a seasoned warrior. In the midst of the intense legal battle, the parallels between Harrison's case and her own situation continued to haunt her. His carefully constructed image of success, meticulously crafted over years, was unraveling before her very eyes. The meticulously created world he had lived in was crumbling, mirroring the fragile foundation of her own double life. The fear of exposure, a constant companion in her personal life, echoed in the courtroom. The fear of revealing her own hidden truths gnawed at her. During a break in the proceedings, Sarah found herself staring out the courthouse window. The rain lashed against the glass, blurring the city skyline. The gray sky reflected the turmoil within her. The city, usually a vibrant source of energy, felt oppressive, mirroring the weight of her secrets. Each raindrop seemed to highlight the cracks that were beginning to appear in her carefully constructed world. The case moved forward, and the testimony became increasingly complex. Financial records were presented, expert witnesses were called, and the courtroom became a stage for a battle of wits, a display of legal maneuvering at its most intense. Sarah was in her element, showcasing her sharp intellect and her unwavering determination. She was a lioness defending her prey, a warrior fighting to protect her client and perhaps, unconsciously, herself. The intensity of the courtroom battles was a welcome distraction from the inner turmoil she carried. As the trial progressed, the suspense intensified. The line between Sarah's professional and personal lives blurred further. The deception, the betrayal, the carefully constructed lies, these were the very elements that formed the core of both Harrison's case and her own secret life. The pressure was immense, and the stakes were impossibly high. The final day of the trial arrived like a final act in a carefully orchestrated play. Sarah stood before the jury, delivering her closing argument. Her words were a testament to her skills, a blend of passion and logic, a powerful summation of the defense's case. She painted a picture of Harrison as a man who had made mistakes, but who was not inherently evil. She appealed to their sense of justice, their sense of empathy. Her voice resonated with power, but it was a controlled power, a strength forged in the crucible of her own personal struggles. The jury deliberated, and the courtroom fell silent. The wait was excruciating, an agonizing period of uncertainty that mirrored the uncertainty in Sarah's own life. When the verdict finally came, not guilty, a wave of relief washed over Sarah. But it was a fleeting relief, quickly replaced by a growing sense of unease. The victory felt hollow, tainted by the knowledge of her own precarious situation. She had won the battle, but the war within herself still raged. The parallels between her client's case and her own secret life remained, an unsettling reminder of the precarious balance she maintained. The city lights of Chicago, viewed from her penthouse, seemed to mock her victory, their brilliance highlighting the fragility of her carefully constructed world, a world that hung precariously on a thread of deception. The silence in her luxurious apartment was deafening, a stark contrast to the clamor of the courtroom. The case was over, but Sarah knew, deep in her heart, that the real battle had just begun. The weight of her secret, the precariousness of her double life, pressed down on her with renewed intensity. The city, a silent witness, reflected the uncertainty of her future, its brilliance a stark reminder of the high stakes of her carefully played game. The question lingered, how much longer could she maintain the facade? The celebratory champagne tasted like ash in Sarah's mouth. The not guilty verdict, a hard-won victory, felt hollow, a flimsy shield against the encroaching storm of her double life. The post-trial euphoria, the relief that should have been overwhelming, was muted, replaced by a chilling premonition. It began subtly, a minor detail buried deep within the mountain of financial documents, a seemingly insignificant transaction that linked her client, Mr. Harrison, to David. David, her lover, the architect of her carefully constructed deceit. A shared investment account, a seemingly innocuous detail that appeared only briefly during the cross-examination, a detail she had initially dismissed as irrelevant, a detail that now gnawed at her like a persistent guilt. The account, registered under a shell corporation, had facilitated a series of untraceable transactions, and one of them, a small but significant sum, had passed through David's private offshore account. The connection was faint, almost imperceptible. It could easily be dismissed as coincidence, a chance intersection in a complex web of financial transactions. But to Sarah, trained to dissect lies and uncover hidden truths, the coincidence was too precise, too perfect to be dismissed as simply accidental. It was a thread, thin as a spider's silk, yet strong enough to unravel the intricate tapestry of her double life. The implications were staggering. If the connection were discovered, investigated, and proven, it wouldn't just expose Harrison's carefully concealed financial misdeeds, it would also expose her secret. Her affair, a clandestine life she had so meticulously guarded, could be laid bare, the carefully constructed walls of her double life crumbling beneath the weight of evidence. The fear, a familiar companion, now clutched at her throat, constricting her breath, suffocating her with its icy grip. That night, Sarah barely slept. Her luxurious penthouse apartment, usually a sanctuary of calm and order, felt like a prison. The city lights, shimmering against the dark cityscape, seemed to mock her, highlighting the fragility of her carefully constructed world. She replayed the trial in her mind, dissecting every word, every gesture, every glance. The minor detail, that seemingly insignificant transaction, haunted her, a constant reminder of the precarious balance she maintained. The next morning, she arrived at her office earlier than usual, the city still shrouded in the pre-dawn gloom. She found herself staring out her window, the cityscape mirroring the turmoil within her. The rising sun cast long shadows, highlighting the cracks in the facade she had so carefully constructed. She needed to understand the extent of the connection between Harrison and David. She needed to understand if the connection was merely coincidental or something far more sinister. She spent hours sifting through documents, reviewing transcripts, and analyzing financial statements. The legal puzzle was complex, a tangled web of offshore accounts, shell corporations, and coded transactions. Every financial transaction she scrutinized was a step closer to understanding the depth of this new danger, to understanding the true extent of the threat. The sheer volume of information was overwhelming, yet she pressed on, fueled by a mixture of fear and determination. The investigation led her down a rabbit hole of cryptic emails, coded messages, and offshore bank accounts. She uncovered a pattern, a series of transactions that hinted at a deeper, more intricate connection between Harrison and David than she had initially imagined. The initial, seemingly innocuous, shared account was only the tip of the iceberg. As the days turned into nights, Sarah felt the weight of her secret pressing down on her with crushing force. The lines between her professional and personal life blurred further, her efforts to manage one life now intertwined with the precariousness of the other. She was walking a tightrope, each step potentially leading to a catastrophic fall. The city, a constant presence outside her window, mirrored her inner turmoil, its vibrant energy now overshadowed by the looming threat of exposure. The investigation revealed that Harrison, through a network of shell corporations and offshore accounts, had been funding David's risky investments that seemed to be disguised as legitimate business ventures. The details were cryptic, obscured by layers of secrecy and financial obfuscation. But the pattern was clear: Harrison was financially supporting David, providing him with a steady stream of capital through a series of clandestine transactions. The realization sent a chill down Sarah's spine. David's seemingly innocent business ventures were being financed by a man she had just defended in a high-stakes embezzlement trial. This connection was far more profound than she initially thought. It suggested a deeper conspiracy, a web of deceit that extended far beyond Harrison's financial empire. This new knowledge added another layer of complexity to her already precarious situation. The growing unease among her colleagues was palpable. Whispers followed her in the hallways, the curious glances, the hushed conversations. The investigation into Harrison's case was ongoing, and the initial minor detail, the shared account, had sparked renewed interest in the case from the authorities. She sensed suspicion, a growing awareness that something wasn't quite right, a creeping realization that she, too, might be under scrutiny. The pressure mounted, forcing Sarah to make increasingly difficult choices. She had to balance her loyalty to David, her lover, against her professional integrity. She had to protect her secret while simultaneously navigating the complex legal implications of this newly uncovered connection. The line between right and wrong blurred even further, as she found herself increasingly entangled in a web of deceit that threatened to consume her entirely. One evening, she received an anonymous phone call, a chillingly calm voice warning her to end her involvement with David, warning her to step away before she, too, was pulled under. The threat was implicit, yet unmistakable, a grim reminder of the danger that lurked just beneath the surface of her meticulously constructed double life. The voice hung up, leaving Sarah trembling in the aftermath of the call. It was a stark reminder that her carefully crafted existence was on the precipice of collapse. The silence that followed was far more frightening than the anonymous voice itself. The city lights outside her window seemed to pulse with a foreboding energy, the shimmering cityscape mirroring her inner turmoil. Sarah knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that the cracks in the foundation of her double life were widening, threatening to bring down the entire edifice. The stakes were higher than ever before, and the time to act was running out. The question wasn't just how much longer she could maintain her secret, it was whether she even wanted to anymore. The weight of her choices, the consequences of her actions, pressed down on her, a crushing burden that threatened to overwhelm her. The game was far from over, and the stakes were about to rise exponentially. The anonymous call had rattled Sarah to her core, the chilling implication of its message echoing long after the dial tone faded. Sleep was a luxury she couldn't afford, her mind racing with 1,000 scenarios, each more terrifying than the last. The precarious balance she'd maintained for so long felt like it was teetering on the brink of collapse. The city outside, usually a comforting backdrop to her opulent life, now felt like a menacing presence, its glittering lights a stark contrast to the darkness closing in on her. The next morning, the subtle unease that had been simmering beneath the surface of her professional life boiled over. A new player entered the game, a figure shrouded in shadows, an investigator whose presence was as chilling as the anonymous call. His name was Miles Corbin, a man known for his tenacity, his unwavering focus, and his unnerving ability to unearth even the most meticulously buried secrets. He hadn't revealed his client's identity, but Sarah's gut instinct told her it was connected to Mark Harrison, the man whose freedom she had secured. The initial suspicion of infidelity, she now realized, was a smokescreen, a cleverly disguised introduction to a much more intricate investigation. Corbin's methods were subtle, almost imperceptible at first. He wasn't a flashy, Hollywood-style detective, he was a shadow, a silent observer who moved with the quiet efficiency of a predator stalking its prey. Sarah noticed him first at the courthouse, a nondescript man in a dark suit, his presence blending seamlessly with the everyday hustle and bustle. He appeared to be casually observing the comings and goings, his eyes sharp and alert, taking mental notes of every interaction, every fleeting glance. Over the next few days, his presence became more noticeable, more insistent. He seemed to materialize wherever Sarah went, a persistent phantom trailing her footsteps. He'd be seated in a coffee shop across the street from her office, or waiting patiently in the lobby of her apartment building. He was a master of surveillance, adept at blending in, his movements fluid and undetectable. The casualness of his observation was the most unsettling aspect. It suggested a depth of knowledge that should have been impossible. Sarah's carefully constructed routine shattered. Her usual ease and confidence were replaced by an ever-present sense of unease. The simple act of leaving her apartment or entering her office became an exercise in paranoia. Every shadow seemed to conceal him, every rustle a potential sign of his presence. The city, once a source of comfort and anonymity, now felt like a vast, open space where she was constantly being watched, constantly under scrutiny. The fear wasn't just about exposure of her affair with David, it was about the unraveling of the carefully constructed web of lies that supported her entire existence. The investigation into Harrison's finances, though seemingly unrelated, was now inextricably linked to her personal life, her professional success, and her future. The lines between her two lives had become hopelessly blurred, the consequences of her actions now looming over her like a dark storm cloud. Corbin's interest wasn't limited to Sarah's professional life, he was quietly investigating her personal connections. He discreetly followed her to David's apartment, observing their interactions from a distance, his gaze cold and analytical. He documented her movements with meticulous precision, accumulating a dossier of seemingly innocuous details, each a small piece of a much larger puzzle. He was a master of piecing together fragments of information, a talent that turned seemingly harmless facts into potent evidence. The constant surveillance weighed heavily on Sarah. The sleeplessness worsened, the exhaustion deepening, the shadows under her eyes growing darker with each passing day. She started making mistakes, minor oversights that she wouldn't have made before. She missed a deadline, a detail she would usually meticulously attend to, her concentration faltered during a crucial meeting, causing a moment of awkward silence. These minor lapses were signs of the immense stress she was under, cracks in the facade of her composed and collected persona. The tension between Sarah and Corbin was palpable, a silent battle of wits waged in the crowded streets and quiet corners of the city. She attempted to evade him, but he was always a step ahead, his movements as unpredictable as the wind. She started changing her routines, using back alleys and alternative routes, hoping to throw him off her trail. But Corbin remained relentless, his determination unwavering, his focus relentlessly fixed on her. One evening, she decided to confront him. She found him sitting in a dimly lit bar, a glass of whiskey in his hand, his expression calm and observant. The conversation was brief, a tense exchange of words veiled in politeness, a dance of deception and suspicion. He didn't reveal his client's identity, but he hinted at the extent of his knowledge, his words carrying a subtle threat. "You're good, Ms. Miller," he said, his voice low and measured, but even the best players stumble. The implication hung heavy in the air, a veiled warning that he was closing in, that her meticulously constructed world was about to crumble. Sarah left the bar feeling shaken, the encounter leaving her more unsettled than ever before. The weight of her double life pressed down on her with renewed intensity. The game had escalated, the stakes raised significantly. The city lights, once a source of comfort, now seemed to mock her, highlighting her vulnerability, her precarious position. The investigator's shadow had fallen upon her, and it was a shadow that would not easily be shaken off. The chase was on, a dangerous game of cat and mouse where the stakes were not merely professional reputation, but life itself. The anonymous call, the relentless investigator, the mounting pressure, it all culminated in a suffocating sense of dread, a chilling premonition of the storm that was about to break. The weight of Corbin's veiled threat pressed down on Sarah like a physical burden. She replayed their conversation in her mind, dissecting each word, each inflection, searching for a clue, a hint of his client's identity. But Corbin was a master of misdirection, a puppeteer pulling strings she couldn't see. The more she thought about it, the more she realized the depth of his knowledge was unnerving. He knew things he shouldn't, details that only someone close to her could possess. Panic clawed at her. She couldn't outrun Corbin, she needed to control the narrative, to regain the upper hand. A reckless plan began to form in her mind, a calculated risk that could either save her or shatter everything she'd built. It involved manipulating evidence, a dangerous gamble that pushed the boundaries of ethical conduct, a path she knew could easily lead to her downfall. But the alternative, being exposed, her life laid bare for all to see, was far worse. The plan was audacious, bordering on insane. It relied on a subtle distortion of the facts, a carefully crafted deception that would shift the focus of the investigation, diverting Corbin's attention away from her. It was a tightrope walk, a delicate balance of truth and falsehood, requiring precise execution and an unwavering nerve. One wrong move, one misstep, and everything would come crashing down. The first step involved revisiting the Harrison case files. She spent hours poring over documents, meticulously searching for any inconsistencies, any loophole she could exploit. The sheer volume of information was daunting, but her keen legal mind began to identify a potential weakness, a discrepancy that could be leveraged to her advantage. It was a detail most would overlook, a minor inconsistency that held the key to her escape. The next few days were a blur of activity. She worked late into the night, tweaking her strategy, refining her approach. She contacted a trusted source within the financial sector, a former colleague who owed her a favor, someone whose discretion she could rely upon. The request was unusual, even for Sarah. It required a subtle alteration of financial records, a clandestine maneuver that skirted the edge of legality. But the risk was worth it, she believed. It was a calculated gamble, a necessary evil to ensure her survival. The manipulation of the records was delicate, requiring a touch so light it would be almost imperceptible. The goal wasn't to create new evidence but to subtly alter existing data, shifting the focus of the investigation, creating a new narrative that would protect her while simultaneously implicating another. It was a complex maneuver that required not only legal expertise but also a deep understanding of human psychology. The anxiety gnawed at her, the pressure mounting with each passing hour. Sleep was a distant memory, her body fueled by caffeine and adrenaline. The city outside, once a symbol of her success, now felt like a prison, a cage from which she was desperately trying to escape. The weight of her double life felt heavier than ever, the consequences of her actions looming large. The act of altering the documents was a betrayal of her professional integrity, a transgression she couldn't easily reconcile. But the fear of exposure, the threat to her carefully constructed existence, justified the risk in her mind. She was playing a dangerous game, a game where the stakes were her freedom, her career, and perhaps even her life. The final piece of the puzzle was planting a subtle hint, a piece of circumstantial evidence that would steer Corbin's investigation in a different direction. This involved a calculated risk, leaving a faint trail that would point to a rival lawyer, a known adversary with whom she'd had previous professional disagreements. It was a subtle manipulation, a delicate act of misdirection that would hopefully shift the focus of the investigation away from her and onto someone else. She left the subtly altered documents in a secure location, accessible only to her and those involved in the conspiracy, a move that felt both exhilarating and terrifying. The finality of the act settled upon her, the weight of her decision pressing down with an almost unbearable intensity. The risk was enormous, but she had no choice. Her survival depended on it. The carefully orchestrated deception was in place, a web of lies designed to protect her from the relentless pursuit of Miles Corbin. The waiting game began. Sarah watched from a distance as Corbin continued his investigation, oblivious to the subtle changes she'd implemented. She could almost feel the shift in his focus, the subtle redirection of his attention. The tension was palpable, a silent battle of wits played out in the shadows of the city. But the victory felt fragile, temporary. One wrong move, one unforeseen event, and the entire house of cards could come tumbling down. The days that followed were filled with a gnawing anxiety, a constant fear that the deception would be discovered. She lived on the edge, her nerves stretched taut, every phone call a potential threat, every shadow a sign of impending doom. The city, once a comforting refuge, now felt like a stage where she was constantly performing, playing a role that was threatening to consume her. The climax of the chapter arrives with a cryptic phone call. A hushed voice delivers a brief, enigmatic message, hinting at the success of Sarah's manipulation. But the tone is ambiguous, laced with a sense of foreboding, a warning that her victory might be short-lived. The call ends abruptly, leaving Sarah suspended in a state of uncertainty, unsure if she's won or if this is merely a temporary reprieve before the next wave of danger strikes. The chapter concludes with Sarah staring out at the city skyline, the glittering lights reflecting in her weary eyes. The tension is palpable, a chilling premonition that hangs in the air. She had played a dangerous game, and while she had seemingly won this round, the feeling of impending doom is far from gone. The city, once a symbol of her success, now feels like a menacing entity, a constant reminder of the precariousness of her position, the fragile nature of her triumph, and the looming shadow of the consequences that still await her. The reader is left with a sense of unease, wondering if Sarah's victory is merely a prelude to a more devastating confrontation. The suspense is maximized, leaving the reader craving the next chapter to uncover the ultimate consequences of Sarah's calculated risk. Chapter 2: Unraveling Threads. The phone call had been a fleeting whisper in the night, a cryptic message promising success but laced with an undercurrent of unease. It was a victory, yes, but a hollow one, tasting of ash and apprehension. The city lights, once a beacon of her ambition, now seemed to mock her, their glittering facades hiding a creeping sense of doom. Corbin's investigation, she'd believed, was off course, diverted by the subtle manipulations she'd woven into the Harrison case. But the silence, the absence of any further contact, was more unsettling than any overt threat. It suggested a deeper game, a more patient predator. Sarah found herself unable to work, the familiar rhythm of her legal practice disrupted by a relentless tide of anxiety. Her usually pristine office, a sanctuary of order and control, now felt claustrophobic, the walls closing in. She paced the polished floors, her heels clicking a frantic rhythm against the silence, each echo a hammer blow against the fragile composure she desperately tried to maintain. The carefully constructed facade, the image of a successful, unflappable lawyer, was cracking, revealing the tremor of fear beneath. Sleep offered no respite. Nightmares plagued her, swirling visions of accusations, courtroom dramas, and the cold, hard stare of Miles Corbin. She woke in a cold sweat, her heart hammering against her ribs, the city's muted sounds amplifying the paranoia that gnawed at her. Even in the supposed safety of her apartment, a luxury penthouse overlooking the city, the fear persisted, a chilling presence that clung to her like a second skin. The shadows seemed to writhe, every creak and groan of the building a potential intrusion, every unfamiliar sound a potential threat. Days bled into weeks, each one a slow, agonizing countdown. The meetings, once carefully planned, now felt rushed, clandestine, infused with a desperate urgency. The trusted source in the financial sector, the one who had helped her subtly alter the records, was becoming increasingly nervous. His hushed phone calls, filled with terse updates and cryptic warnings, only heightened Sarah's anxiety. He spoke of inquiries, of investigations, of whispers spreading through the financial circles like wildfire. The tightrope walk she had embarked upon was starting to sway dangerously. The pressure to maintain her composure was immense. Publicly, she remained the successful lawyer, cool and collected, navigating the complexities of the legal world with her usual practiced ease. But behind the professional mask, a fierce battle raged. The charade was exhausting, the constant vigilance a heavy burden that wore her down, both physically and mentally. The line between her carefully crafted public persona and her true, terrified self was becoming increasingly blurred. One evening, she found herself driving aimlessly through the city, the familiar streets now feeling alien and menacing. She stopped at a secluded park, seeking a moment of peace, a respite from the relentless pressure. As she sat on a bench, the city lights twinkling around her, a wave of despair washed over her. The meticulously crafted plan, the calculated risks, the audacious manipulations, they all felt futile now, overshadowed by the looming threat of exposure. She was drowning in a sea of her own making, a whirlpool of lies and deception that threatened to pull her under. The realization that she might lose everything, her career, her reputation, her freedom, struck her with the force of a physical blow. The weight of her actions, the moral compromises she'd made, pressed down on her with an almost unbearable intensity. The sense of isolation was crushing, the silence of the night amplifying the hollowness inside her. She had no one to turn to, no one to confide in, trapped in a labyrinth of her own creation. The tension reached a fever pitch during a particularly grueling court case. The pressure mounted as Corbin, seemingly aware of her actions, subtly shifted his tactics. His questions became sharper, his gaze more piercing. Sarah felt the sweat beading on her forehead, her heart pounding against her ribs. She fought back with practiced skill, but the constant fear gnawed at her composure, a subtle tremor in her voice betraying the inner turmoil. The victory, if she could even call it that, was Pyrrhic. It was a win bought with the currency of fear and deception, and she felt a growing sense of dread. That night, a different kind of fear gripped her, the fear of losing control. The meticulously constructed narrative she'd crafted was starting to unravel, the threads of her deception coming loose. She sensed a shift in the atmosphere, a subtle change in the dynamics of the investigation. The cryptic phone calls ceased, replaced by a chilling silence, a vacuum of uncertainty that intensified her anxiety. The city, once her oyster, now felt like a vast, unforgiving wilderness, a place where shadows lurked and secrets whispered in the wind. Sarah's apartment, once a sanctuary, now felt like a prison, every corner holding a potential threat. She started to see Corbin everywhere, in the shadows, in the reflections of the city lights, in the faces of strangers. Her paranoia reached a fever pitch, blurring the line between reality and hallucination. The constant pressure, the relentless fear, had eroded her sense of reality, transforming her life into a waking nightmare. The consequences of her actions had finally caught up to her, threatening to consume her entirely. The net, once loose, was tightening, and Sarah knew she had to find a way to escape before it was too late. The chilling anticipation of the next chapter hung heavy in the air, a stark reminder of the precariousness of her situation. The suspense was suffocating, leaving the reader breathless, desperate to know what fate held for Sarah in the unfolding chapters. The subtle shift started with Mark, her once reliable colleague. He'd always been her rock, a steady presence amidst the chaos of the legal world. Their shared late nights, fueled by caffeine and ambition, had forged a bond she'd considered unbreakable. But now, his eyes held a flicker of something else, suspicion, perhaps, or maybe even something colder, something akin to fear. Their conversations, once easy and flowing, now felt stilted, punctuated by uncomfortable silences and evasive answers. He wouldn't meet her gaze directly, his responses often trailing off mid-sentence, his usually sharp mind seemingly clouded by an unspoken worry. It was a subtle change, easily missed by a casual observer, but Sarah, hyper-aware of every shift in the dynamics around her, noticed it immediately. It was a crack in the foundation of her carefully constructed world, a fissure that threatened to expose the treacherous terrain beneath. Mark's apprehension fueled her own anxieties, feeding into the ever-growing paranoia that consumed her. His silence spoke volumes, a chilling counterpoint to the relentless noise of her own increasingly desperate attempts to maintain control. The strained relationship with David mirrored the growing cracks in her professional life. He'd always been her anchor, a quiet constant in the storm of her ambitions. Their connection, built on shared experiences and unspoken understandings, had provided a sanctuary amidst the chaos. But now, even that safe haven felt threatened. David's own secrets, long buried beneath a veneer of calm, began to surface, adding another layer of complexity to their already fragile relationship. He'd started to become distant, withdrawn, his responses laced with an unusual guardedness. His late nights, once spent in quiet companionship, were now spent alone, the silence punctuated only by the rhythmic tap-tap-tap of his keyboard. He'd become increasingly secretive, his phone calls hushed and cryptic, his demeanor marked by a nervous energy that Sarah found both unsettling and deeply familiar. The shared trust, the foundation of their relationship, was eroding, replaced by suspicion and a growing distance that felt insurmountable. His reticence was a silent accusation, a reflection of the uncertainties swirling around them both. Sarah tried to broach the subject, to bridge the growing chasm between them, but her attempts were met with a wall of silence, a frustrating and painful resistance that only heightened her anxiety. The questions she longed to ask remained unspoken, trapped within her, adding to the burden of secrets she already carried. The comfortable silence they once shared was replaced by a tense quietude, filled with unspoken anxieties and mutual suspicions. Their relationship, once a refuge, now felt like a battleground, a silent war fought with hushed words and averted gazes. The pressure mounted, the carefully constructed facade of her life crumbling around her. The lies she had woven, the manipulations she'd employed, were beginning to unravel, their threads coming loose, exposing the dark heart of her deception. The sense of isolation intensified, the silence of her apartment a constant reminder of her solitude. The city, once a symbol of her success and ambition, now felt like a hostile landscape, filled with potential betrayals and lurking shadows. The legal battles intensified, each victory feeling more like a defeat. Corbin, her adversary, seemed to be closing in, his questions becoming increasingly sharper, his gaze more piercing. Sarah's carefully constructed defenses began to crumble under the relentless pressure, her composure wavering, her carefully practiced composure faltering under the weight of her own guilt and fear. She was fighting a losing battle, her lies and manipulations exposed, her carefully constructed world teetering on the brink of collapse. The betrayals weren't limited to her professional life. A trusted friend, someone she considered family, revealed a hidden agenda, their words a venomous betrayal that struck with the force of a physical blow. The revelation felt like a punch to the gut, leaving her gasping for air, struggling to comprehend the depth of the deception. It wasn't just a violation of trust, it was a shattering of her belief in the people closest to her, a realization that the world she thought she knew was a carefully constructed illusion. This new betrayal chipped away at what little remained of her resolve, further unraveling the already fragile threads of her sanity. The constant fear, the ever-present threat of exposure, was chipping away at her, eroding her ability to think clearly, to make rational decisions. Sleep offered no respite, her nights haunted by nightmares, visions of accusations, courtroom dramas, and Corbin's relentless pursuit. She found herself isolated, adrift in a sea of her own making, surrounded by a cast of characters whose loyalties were as fluid as the city's relentless currents. The once steady ground beneath her feet shifted, turning treacherous and unreliable. Alliances shifted, betrayals multiplied, and Sarah was forced to confront the horrifying truth: she was completely alone, surrounded by a web of deception she herself had spun. The only question remaining was, could she unravel it before it completely consumed her? The weight of her actions, the moral compromises she'd made, pressed down on her with an almost unbearable intensity. The city, once her oyster, now felt like a suffocating cage, closing in on her from all sides. The next move, she knew, had to be calculated and precise. The stakes, however, had never been higher. The game had changed, and Sarah was no longer playing by the rules. The courtroom was stifling, the air thick with the scent of old wood and nervous sweat. Corbin, her nemesis, sat across the aisle, a smug smirk playing on his lips. He'd anticipated her every move, it seemed, his questions surgically precise, designed to expose the cracks in her carefully constructed facade. Sarah, however, wasn't about to let him win. She met his gaze, her own expression a mask of controlled composure, her mind already several steps ahead. Her legal strategy was a complex tapestry woven from threads of calculated risk and audacious maneuvers. She knew that a direct confrontation would only serve to highlight her weaknesses, so she chose a different tactic: evasion. She deflected his pointed questions with carefully worded answers, her responses oblique, designed to mislead and obfuscate. She used legal jargon, weaving a labyrinthine web of technicalities that even the seasoned judge seemed to struggle to decipher. "Objection, Your Honor," she'd interject, her voice calm but firm, "the question is irrelevant and calls for speculation." Each objection was a carefully calculated move, a small victory in a larger war. She'd buy time, allowing her to regroup, to formulate her next strategy. She'd study Corbin's face, searching for any hint of doubt, any chink in his seemingly impenetrable armor. Back in her dimly lit office, the city sprawling outside her window like a restless beast, she meticulously reviewed the case files. The faint glow of her computer screen illuminated her determined face, a stark contrast to the shadows that seemed to cling to the corners of the room. She'd pored over every document, every transcript, searching for any overlooked detail, any piece of information that could turn the tide in her favor. She worked late into the night, fueled by copious amounts of black coffee and a relentless drive to succeed. Her apartment, normally a sanctuary, now felt like a pressure cooker. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the occasional ticking of the clock, each tick a reminder of the dwindling time she had. Sleep was a luxury she couldn't afford. Instead, she'd pace, restlessly reviewing her strategy, anticipating Corbin's next move. She'd run simulations in her head, playing out different scenarios, weighing the risks and rewards of each possible course of action. She was a master strategist, a legal chess player who saw several moves ahead. She utilized every legal loophole, every procedural nuance, to her advantage. She'd file motions to suppress evidence, challenge the admissibility of witness testimony, and raise procedural objections with surgical precision. Each maneuver was a calculated risk, a gamble that could either solidify her position or hasten her downfall. One such maneuver involved a seemingly insignificant detail, a discrepancy in a witness's statement. She'd pounced on it, using it to discredit the entire testimony, casting doubt on the prosecution's case. It was a masterclass in legal maneuvering, a display of her sharp intellect and unwavering determination. She'd transformed a minor inconsistency into a major crack in the prosecution's foundation. Another tactic involved securing an unexpected alliance. A junior lawyer on Corbin's team, burdened by conscience, secretly provided her with crucial information, a smoking gun that exposed a flaw in Corbin's investigation. Sarah had sensed the young lawyer's unease, his moral discomfort with the case. She'd played on his conscience, offering a subtle hint of redemption, a chance to right a perceived wrong. The information he'd provided was a game-changer, a lifeline in the turbulent waters of her legal battle. Her home became her war room. Spread across her kitchen table were files, legal documents, and handwritten notes, a chaotic yet organized landscape of her strategic planning. She'd pore over maps of the city, tracing routes, imagining Corbin's movements, anticipating his strategies. Her apartment, once a place of refuge, transformed into a battleground of legal warfare. However, the tension was palpable, the stress relentless. The weight of her actions pressed down on her, the constant fear of exposure gnawing at her resolve. Every phone call was a potential threat, every email a ticking time bomb. She was living on the edge, balancing precariously between triumph and utter ruin. Even her relationship with David became a strategic battlefield. She couldn't trust him completely, the distance between them a chasm she struggled to bridge. Yet, his insights, his understanding of her psyche, were invaluable assets. She carefully revealed bits and pieces of her legal strategy, gauging his reactions, seeking his counsel while simultaneously guarding her secrets. Days blurred into nights, fueled by adrenaline and caffeine. The legal battles raged on, each victory a small reprieve, each setback a blow that threatened to unravel her carefully constructed defenses. Yet, Sarah persisted, her cunning intelligence and unwavering resolve her only allies in this treacherous game of legal warfare. She was fighting not only for her freedom but also for her sanity, her survival. The city lights twinkled outside her window, a silent witness to her struggle, her relentless pursuit of justice, however twisted her definition of justice might be. The game was far from over, but Sarah, ever the strategist, was prepared to play until the very end. The legal maneuvers were just the beginning. The true battle was yet to come, a war fought not only in the courtroom but also in the shadowed corners of her own conscience. She had to stay one step ahead, anticipate Corbin's next move, and ensure her survival, even if it meant bending the rules, even if it meant sacrificing parts of herself along the way. The stakes, as always, were impossibly high. The rain lashed against the windows of O'Malley's, blurring the neon glow of the city into a hazy, indistinct smear. Inside, the air hung thick with the scent of stale beer and desperation. Sarah sat nursing a glass of something dark and potent, the amber liquid mirroring the turmoil within her. Across the small, round table sat Mark, his face etched with a weariness that mirrored her own. The comfortable silence between them was a fragile truce, a temporary respite from the relentless pressure bearing down on them both. He'd called her, a terse message on her burner phone, a meeting, he'd said, essential. She'd known what it meant, the unspoken urgency in his tone a chilling premonition. She'd anticipated this confrontation, this reckoning, but the reality was far more brutal than any simulation she'd run in her head. The carefully constructed walls she'd built around her emotions threatened to crumble under the weight of it all. "It's about the package," Mark finally said, his voice a low rumble, barely audible above the muffled din of the bar. He didn't need to elaborate. They both knew. The package, a collection of incriminating documents she'd meticulously compiled, was the linchpin of her entire strategy, a potential nuclear bomb capable of obliterating Corbin's case and exposing a web of corruption that reached far higher than anyone dared imagine. But its existence was a precarious secret, a ticking time bomb that threatened to detonate at any moment. "Corbin's closing in," Sarah said, her voice barely a whisper. The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken dread. She could feel the weight of his gaze, the unspoken questions that hung between them. The silence stretched, punctuated only by the clinking of glasses and the sporadic bursts of laughter from other patrons. "He knows more than he's letting on," Mark continued, his gaze unwavering. "He's close. Too close." Sarah felt a chill crawl down her spine. She'd anticipated Corbin's tenacity, his ruthlessness, but the speed with which he was closing in was alarming. She'd underestimated him, allowed her arrogance to blind her to the potential consequences of her actions. The meticulously constructed web she'd woven was unraveling, thread by fragile thread. "I've moved it," she said, her voice strained. "It's safe, for now." The lie tasted like ash in her mouth. The package wasn't safe. Nothing felt safe anymore. The fear, cold and clammy, gripped her, a vice around her heart. Mark leaned closer, his eyes narrowed. "Safe where, Sarah?" "Because if he finds it," his voice trailed off, the unspoken threat hanging heavy in the air. The implications were terrifying. Exposure meant not only her professional ruin but potential imprisonment, a life spent behind bars, away from David, away from the life she'd carefully constructed. "I have contingencies," she said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. It was a half-truth, a desperate attempt to maintain control in the face of mounting chaos. She'd created backups, hidden copies, but the risk remained ever-present, a dark shadow clinging to her. The tension in the bar was almost palpable, a suffocating blanket of dread. The conversation that followed was a brutal excavation of her past, a painful exploration of the motivations that drove her to this precipice. She spoke of her father, a man whose life had been cruelly stolen, a victim of a system that seemed designed to protect the guilty and punish the innocent. She spoke of the injustice, the burning rage that fueled her relentless pursuit of retribution, even if it meant sacrificing her own moral compass along the way. The lines between justice and revenge blurred, becoming inextricably intertwined. Her words tumbled out, a torrent of confessions and justifications, a desperate attempt to make sense of her choices, to find some semblance of redemption in the wreckage of her life. Mark listened, his expression unreadable, his silence a judgment she couldn't bear to decipher. He understood, she knew, the darkness that lurked within her. He'd seen it before, witnessed the transformation of the sharp, brilliant lawyer she once was into the morally ambiguous figure she had become. He'd been her confidant, her partner in crime, and now he was the judge, his verdict hanging unspoken in the air. The rain continued to beat against the windows, a relentless percussion accompanying their somber dialogue. The city outside, a vibrant tapestry of lights and shadows, was a stark contrast to the darkness that enveloped them. She felt trapped, caught in a web of her own making, her actions creating a labyrinth from which there seemed no escape. As the conversation wound down, the weight of her actions pressed down on her with crushing force. The casual cruelty, the calculated risks, the compromises she had made, they were all coming back to haunt her. The image of David, his face etched with worry, flashed in her mind, a painful reminder of the collateral damage her actions had caused. Leaving the bar, the city lights seemed to mock her, their brilliance a stark contrast to the emptiness she felt inside. The rain had stopped, leaving behind a slick, glistening street, reflecting the city's neon glow. She looked up, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek, a silent testament to the unraveling of her carefully constructed world. The music of her impending downfall had begun to play, a symphony of guilt, fear, and uncertainty. The climax was yet to come. The game, she knew, was far from over. The cab ride was a blur, the city lights streaking past like fallen stars. Sarah clutched the small, worn leather satchel, its contents her only remaining lifeline. Inside, nestled amongst carefully arranged layers of padding, lay the digital copies, her insurance policy, her last desperate gamble. The originals were gone, destroyed, a sacrifice she'd made in a desperate attempt to stay one step ahead of Corbin. But the digital copies, distributed across encrypted servers and hidden cloud storage locations, were her last hope. She'd scattered them like seeds on the wind, hoping at least some would take root. Her phone buzzed, a message from an untraceable number. A simple word, rendezvous. No location, no time. Just the chilling implication of imminent danger, a silent agreement forged in the shadows of the city. She knew who it was, a ghost from her past, a contact she'd used sparingly but had now grown to rely on. He was her last resort, the wild card she'd hoped she wouldn't have to play. The meeting point was a deserted warehouse on the edge of the docks, a place where the city's underbelly festered in the damp, salty air. The smell of decay and desperation hung heavy, a fitting atmosphere for her clandestine encounter. She found him waiting in the shadows, a hulking figure shrouded in darkness. He was known only as Silas, a man who dealt in secrets and shadows, a purveyor of illicit services. His reputation preceded him, a grim legend whispered in hushed tones in the city's darker corners. Silas spoke little, his words clipped and precise. The deal was simple: he would secure her safe passage out of the city, a discreet exit facilitated by his network of contacts, for a hefty price. The price, of course, was far more than money. She had to offer something in return, something valuable enough to justify the risk he was taking. She offered him information, details concerning Corbin's network of corruption, pieces of the puzzle that could topple a carefully constructed empire. It was a dangerous game, playing one powerful man against another, but it was her only shot at survival. The transaction was swift and brutal. The exchange of information was a clandestine dance of coded messages and hushed whispers, a transaction completed in the heart of the city's shadows. She felt a chilling sense of vulnerability, of being exposed and stripped bare. She handed him the encrypted flash drive containing the data, a tangible representation of the risk she was taking. In return, he gave her a simple, unmarked ticket, her one-way escape from the city's clutches. As she walked away, a sense of detachment washed over her. She felt like a ghost, a phantom moving through the city streets. The weight of her actions hung heavy, the enormity of her betrayal weighing on her conscience. She had crossed lines she never thought she'd cross, compromised her values in the name of self-preservation. Her actions were desperate, fueled by a primal need for survival. The next few days were a blur of frantic activity. She liquidated her assets, transferring funds to offshore accounts, erasing her digital footprint, leaving behind the life she had meticulously built. Each action was a step further into the shadows, a renunciation of her former identity. She was shedding her skin, becoming someone new, someone unrecognizable. The feeling was disorienting, terrifying, yet liberating in its own perverse way. She was becoming a ghost, a phantom haunting the edges of society. Her name would become a whisper, a legend, if it was remembered at all. She'd become a pariah, an outcast, a fugitive from justice. Yet, a strange sense of calm settled over her as she boarded the private jet, the city's skyline shrinking beneath her. It was a chilling calm, the quiet before the storm, a temporary reprieve before the inevitable reckoning. Her escape was far from over. Corbin was relentless, his reach extended further than she had ever imagined. She knew he'd find her, eventually. The question wasn't if, but when. And the anticipation of his pursuit was a haunting symphony of dread that echoed in her heart. Her new identity was carefully constructed, a false persona she would inhabit until the storm passed. She adopted a new name, a new accent, a new background, a carefully crafted illusion of normalcy. But the fear was always there, a constant companion, a cold hand gripping her heart. The memory of her past, the guilt of her actions, was a perpetual torment, a shadow that followed her wherever she went. The life she had built, the career she had painstakingly crafted, was gone. David, her beloved David, was a phantom image in her mind, a reminder of the life she had lost, the sacrifices she had made. The cost of her survival was high, steeper than she'd ever imagined. It was a price paid in blood, betrayal, and the utter erosion of her soul. Yet, as she looked out at the endless expanse of the ocean, a flicker of defiance sparked within her. She had survived, at least for now. She'd outsmarted Corbin, at least for this round. Her victory was hollow, tainted by the choices she had made, but it was a victory nonetheless. She would continue to live in the shadows, a ghost in her own life, but she would survive. The game, she knew, was far from over. The chase would continue, and the consequences of her actions would echo through the years to come. The weight of her past, the burden of her choices, would forever be her constant companions. But for now, she breathed, and in that breath, found a fragile sense of peace, knowing that even in the depths of darkness, there is always a flicker of light, a fragile hope to cling to. The game, though far from over, was still hers to play. Chapter 3, Reckoning. The sterile white light of the interrogation room seemed to amplify the silence, a silence punctuated only by the rhythmic ticking of a clock that seemed deliberately designed to drive a person mad. Sarah sat across from Detective Miller, his face impassive, a mask that hid the storm brewing behind his steely gray eyes. He'd been relentless, his questioning a relentless barrage designed to break her, to expose the cracks in her carefully constructed facade. But she'd held firm, offering carefully chosen words, nothing concrete enough to incriminate her, yet nothing so evasive as to raise suspicion. He leaned forward, his gaze intense, and placed a file on the table between them. It was a thick manila folder, its edges worn from frequent handling, the label crisp and official. "We have new evidence, Ms. Jennings," he said, his voice a low rumble that sent a shiver down her spine. "Evidence that contradicts your previous statements." Her heart pounded against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the suffocating silence. She forced herself to remain calm, her outward composure a carefully crafted shield. "I'm certain there's been a misunderstanding, Detective," she replied, her voice steady, controlled. He opened the file, revealing a series of photographs. Her breath caught in her throat. They were pictures of her and David, taken at various locations over the past year, not paparazzi shots, but candid, intimate moments. Moments of shared laughter, of stolen kisses, of quiet intimacy. Moments that painted a picture of a relationship far more complex, far more passionate than she had ever admitted. "These were taken from a security camera located across from your apartment building," Miller explained, his voice devoid of emotion. "We've been analyzing them for weeks, correlating them with your known movements and David's confirmed work schedule. The timing, Ms. Jennings, is rather telling." The implication hung heavy in the air, a palpable sense of dread that threatened to suffocate her. He was suggesting she had lied, that she had concealed the depth of her affair with David. She had meticulously crafted a narrative of professional detachment, a story that conveniently omitted the passion that had burned between them, a passion that had almost consumed her. "These photographs don't prove anything," she managed, her voice barely a whisper, a fragile defense against the onslaught of his accusations. "I've already stated my relationship with Mr. Thompson was purely professional." Miller smiled, a slow, chilling curve of his lips. "Purely professional, yet you're found in each other's arms at various locations, at times that coincide with his suspicious absences from work. And then there's the matter of the financial transactions." He produced another document, a bank statement meticulously detailing a series of large, untraceable deposits made into an offshore account, an account she had desperately tried to conceal, an account that had been funded with money she'd claimed had been transferred to a relative. "This relative, Ms. Jennings, denies receiving any funds." The blood drained from her face, leaving her feeling faint, lightheaded. The intricate web of lies she had woven was unraveling, the threads snapping one by one under the weight of the evidence. Her meticulously crafted narrative was crumbling, exposing the messy, complicated truth. The truth about her relationship with David, the truth about the money, the truth about her involvement in the scandal that had rocked the city. "It appears your professional relationship with Mr. Thompson involved more than just consultations, Ms. Jennings," Miller said, his voice laced with a grim satisfaction. "Our investigations have also uncovered evidence suggesting that Mr. Thompson was involved in a significantly larger conspiracy. A conspiracy that, coincidentally, aligns with the disappearance of some rather incriminating documents." He paused, letting his words hang in the air, the unspoken accusation a heavy weight pressing down on her. The documents, the originals, the ones she'd destroyed in a desperate attempt to protect herself, the ones that held the key to Corbin's empire of corruption, were gone. But the digital copies, scattered like seeds on the wind, were still out there, a ticking time bomb that could expose her at any moment. The revelation struck her like a physical blow. The carefully constructed narrative she had built, a fortress designed to protect her from the storm, was collapsing. She had managed to escape Corbin, but in doing so, she had put herself directly in the crosshairs of the law. The consequences of her actions, once a distant threat, were now a stark, undeniable reality. Miller continued, his voice relentless, "We believe you were involved in the destruction of these documents, Ms. Jennings. We have witnesses who place you near the location where they were found." He slid a photograph across the table, a grainy image of a figure that looked strikingly like her near the warehouse where she'd met Silas. The figure's face was obscured, but the distinctive cut of her coat and the posture were unmistakable. The evidence was overwhelming, a mountain of circumstantial proof that pointed directly at her. She had played a dangerous game, a high-stakes gamble where the stakes were her freedom, her future, her very soul. And she had lost. Despair threatened to engulf her, a crushing weight that threatened to break her spirit. She had outsmarted Corbin, but in doing so, she had walked right into the clutches of the law. Her carefully planned escape had turned into a dead end, a cul-de-sac leading directly to the cold, hard reality of prison. The hours that followed were a blur of legal jargon, accusations, and denials. She hired the best legal representation money could buy, a formidable team of lawyers who would fight tooth and nail to keep her out of jail. But even their expertise couldn't erase the damning evidence. The photographs, the bank statements, the witness testimony, it was all too much. The truth, ugly and exposed, hung over her like a dark cloud. She had betrayed David, she had betrayed her own morals, and now, she was paying the price. The once distant specter of reckoning had become a harsh, inescapable reality. She sat alone in her cell, the metallic taste of despair filling her mouth, the chilling certainty of her predicament settling over her like a shroud. The game, it seemed, was finally over. And she had lost. But even in the depths of this despair, a small, flickering ember of defiance remained. She would fight. She would fight for her freedom, for her life, for a future she never thought she would have. The battle was far from over, even though the war had been lost. The reckoning was only just beginning. The courtroom was stifling, a humid blanket draped over the hushed whispers and the rhythmic tapping of 100 pens. Sarah sat ramrod straight, her tailored suit a stark contrast to the chipped paint and faded grandeur of the courtroom. Beside her, her lawyer, Mr. Finch, a man whose reputation preceded him like a dark storm cloud, whispered reassurances she barely registered. Her gaze was fixed on Mark Corbin, perched across the aisle, his face a mask of controlled fury, his eyes boring into her with a chilling intensity. The air crackled with unspoken accusations, with years of simmering resentment finally boiling over. This wasn't a battle of legalities, not entirely. This was a reckoning, a brutal confrontation of wills that transcended the confines of the courtroom. It was a clash between two titans, two individuals who had once danced a dangerous tango of ambition and betrayal, now locked in a desperate struggle for survival. The prosecution's case was built on a foundation of circumstantial evidence, a carefully constructed edifice of innuendo and implication. They had painted a picture of a woman driven by greed, a willing accomplice in a conspiracy that dwarfed even her wildest dreams. But Sarah knew the truth, a truth far more complex, far more twisted than the simplistic narrative the prosecution was trying to sell. Mark was the first to speak, his voice a cultured baritone that resonated through the silent courtroom. He swore under oath to the legitimacy of his business dealings, a declaration that rang hollow in Sarah's ears. He spoke of her supposed betrayal, of her supposed greed, his words dripping with a venom that suggested a deeper, more personal animosity. He described her as a ruthless climber, a social chameleon who had used him to climb the corporate ladder, only to betray him at the most critical juncture. His performance was masterful, a calculated display of controlled rage that elicited gasps from the spectators and sympathetic nods from the jury. Mr. Finch countered with a meticulous dismantling of Corbin's testimony, pointing out inconsistencies, highlighting the lack of concrete evidence, and challenging the very foundation of the prosecution's case. He painted a portrait of a ruthless businessman, a man capable of anything to protect his empire, a man who had systematically silenced anyone who threatened his power. He didn't shy away from depicting Corbin's ruthless tactics, his manipulation, and his willingness to sacrifice others for his own gain. The cross-examination was a brutal battle of wits, a verbal sparring match where the stakes were far higher than mere reputation. It was a fight for Sarah's freedom, for her very life. As the hours bled into one another, the tension in the courtroom thickened, palpable and suffocating. Sarah found herself on the precipice of a mental breakdown, the weight of the accusations, the relentless scrutiny, pressing down on her, threatening to crush her. She gripped the arms of her chair, her knuckles white, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She closed her eyes, trying to summon the strength she needed to withstand the onslaught. Then, unexpectedly, David walked into the courtroom. He'd been a ghost, a shadowy figure lurking on the periphery of her life. Their affair had been a whirlwind, a dangerous dance on the edge of a cliff, a secret passion that had almost destroyed them both. Now, he was here, stepping into the spotlight, into the heart of the storm. He walked directly towards the stand, his face pale but determined, his eyes locking with Sarah's across the vast expanse of the courtroom. He swore to testify in her defense. His testimony was a bombshell, a seismic shift in the momentum of the trial. He admitted to his own involvement in questionable business dealings, to his own compromises. He confessed to the illicit financial transactions, revealing a hidden layer of corruption that extended far beyond Sarah's involvement. He confessed to having been manipulated, to being part of Corbyn's inner circle and having unwittingly participated in the scheme to defraud investors and manipulate stock prices. The courtroom erupted in gasps and murmurs. The revelation shocked everyone present, turning the narrative on its head. The prosecution, caught completely off guard, scrambled to adjust their strategy, their carefully constructed case crumbling under the weight of David's unexpected confession. His words were a lifeline for Sarah, a glimmer of hope in the suffocating darkness. They painted a picture of a far larger conspiracy, a web of deceit that reached into the highest levels of the corporate world. The truth, it seemed, was far more complex, far more intricate than anyone had ever imagined. His testimony also revealed the extent of Corbyn's ruthlessness and Sarah's struggle for survival. He depicted her not as a willing participant in a grand scheme, but as a victim caught in the crosshairs of a powerful man's wrath. He confessed to his knowledge about Sarah's attempts to cover her tracks in order to protect herself, providing a new perspective on the destruction of evidence and the untraceable funds. He explained how Corbyn had threatened him into remaining silent, threatening to expose his own transgressions if he dared to speak out. He painted a picture of a man driven by power and greed, a man who would stop at nothing to maintain his position and protect his empire. He'd been forced to play along, a pawn in Corbyn's dangerous game, and his confession was a desperate attempt to atone for his complicity. The confrontation wasn't just between Sarah and Corbyn, it had become a battle for the very soul of the legal system, a test of justice itself. The prosecution's case, once seemingly impenetrable, was now riddled with holes, its foundation shaken by David's stunning revelation. The jury looked bewildered, their faces a mixture of shock, confusion, and dawning understanding. The following days were a blur of intense legal maneuvering. The prosecution attempted to discredit David's testimony, but his confession had set in motion an avalanche, revealing a chain of events that cast doubt on almost everything they had presented. The weight of the evidence began to shift, the balance tilting slowly but surely in Sarah's favor. The final verdict hung in the balance, a fragile equilibrium between guilt and innocence. The jury deliberated for days, the city holding its breath, waiting for the final judgment. When the verdict finally came, it was a shock to everyone. Not guilty. The courtroom erupted in a cacophony of sounds, gasps, cheers, and murmurs. Sarah, staring blankly ahead, felt a wave of relief wash over her, followed by a chilling realization. She had won, but at what cost? The victory was hollow, bittersweet. She had escaped prison, but she had lost so much more. Her reputation was in ruins, her relationships shattered, her trust in humanity shaken to its core. The reckoning was over, but the scars remained, a permanent reminder of the treacherous game she had played and the devastating price she had paid. The war might be over, but the battles within herself had only just begun. The not guilty verdict echoed in the cavernous courtroom, a sound that felt both triumphant and hollow. Sarah felt a strange detachment, watching the celebratory chaos unfold around her as if from a distance. The relief was a fleeting phantom, quickly overtaken by a profound emptiness. Mr. Finch, his face etched with a weary exhaustion that mirrored her own, approached, offering a hand that trembled slightly. "It's over, Sarah," he said, his voice barely a whisper. But it wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The ensuing days were a blur of forced smiles and strained conversations. Journalists swarmed, their questions sharp and invasive, their cameras flashing relentlessly, capturing her image, a woman branded by scandal, forever tainted by association with a conspiracy that had shaken the financial world to its core. The public's narrative, fueled by sensational headlines and half-truths, painted her as a lucky survivor, a cunning manipulator who had escaped justice through a technicality. The truth, the agonizing complexity of it all, remained buried beneath the avalanche of misinformation. She retreated into a self-imposed exile, the opulent apartment that had once symbolized success now feeling like a gilded cage. The city lights, once alluring, now mocked her with their relentless brilliance, a stark reminder of the heights she had reached and the dizzying depths she had plunged. Sleep offered little respite, her dreams haunted by fragmented images, Mark Corbin's icy gaze, David's pale face in the witness stand, the relentless tick-tock of the courtroom clock, the weight of unspoken accusations. Loneliness became her constant companion. Her once vibrant social circle had evaporated, replaced by a chilling silence. The friends who had once flocked to her side now avoided her, their eyes filled with a mixture of suspicion and pity. The professional accolades, the lavish gifts, the admiration, all were reduced to ashes, remnants of a life that no longer existed. The price of deception wasn't just legal jeopardy, it was the complete dismantling of her world. She tried to reach out to David, a desperate need to understand his actions, to comprehend the immense risk he had taken for her. But he was unreachable, a ghost who had vanished as quickly as he had appeared. His testimony, a lifeline in the court, had cost him dearly. His career was in ruins, his reputation shattered. He had sacrificed everything for her, and the weight of that sacrifice pressed down on her with crushing force. The guilt was a living entity, a constant, gnawing ache in her soul. The legal victory had brought her freedom, but it had also unleashed a torrent of internal conflict. The constant questioning, the gnawing self-doubt, the overwhelming sense of loss, it was a torment far more excruciating than any prison cell. She found herself facing a different kind of trial, one held in the court of her own conscience. The accusations from the public were nothing compared to the brutal self-judgment. Had she truly been a victim, or had she been complicit in the web of deceit? The lines blurred, the answers elusive. One evening, she found herself drawn to the park, seeking solace in the quiet solitude of the night. The rustling leaves and the distant city hum seemed to echo the turmoil within her. Sitting on a bench, she watched a young couple stroll by, their laughter carefree and innocent. Their joy was a stark contrast to the darkness that consumed her, a painful reminder of the life she had lost. The innocence she had once possessed, before ambition and greed clouded her judgment, felt like a distant dream. The memory of her parents flooded her consciousness. Their faces, etched with pride and disappointment in equal measure, haunted her dreams. Their sacrifices, their unwavering belief in her, had been betrayed. She had broken their trust, a wound that could never truly heal. The thought of their disappointment was far more painful than any public condemnation. She saw herself in their eyes, not as a successful businesswoman, but as a daughter who had fallen short, who had let them down in the worst possible way. The realization that her actions had damaged her family and destroyed the relationships she had treasured was crippling. She had destroyed her reputation, alienated her friends, jeopardized her career, and left herself utterly alone, burdened by guilt. The cost of her victory was monumental, far exceeding any potential gain she may have once envisioned. It was an empty victory, achieved at a terrible, irreplaceable price. She began to seek redemption, not in the eyes of the court or the public, but in acts of quiet service. She volunteered at a local charity, working tirelessly to help those less fortunate, finding a sense of purpose in giving back. She spent hours writing letters to her parents, pouring out her remorse, her apologies, and her desperate desire to earn back their forgiveness. She dedicated herself to rebuilding the relationships she had so carelessly damaged, understanding the immense work involved in earning back trust. The path to redemption was long and arduous, fraught with uncertainty, but it was a journey she was determined to embrace. The legal battle was over, but the true reckoning had just begun. The scars remained, deep and indelible, a constant reminder of the devastating consequences of her choices. But within the pain, a flicker of hope ignited, the possibility of healing, of rebuilding, of finding peace amidst the ruins of her life. The price of deception had been steep, but she hoped, someday, to find a way to pay that price in full and finally find a measure of forgiveness, for herself and for those she had hurt. The battle within herself, the fight for her own soul, had only just begun, and she was prepared to face it with courage, with remorse, and with the unwavering determination to rebuild her life, one step at a time, brick by weary brick. The quiet hum of the city, usually a lullaby to her troubled sleep, now grated on Sarah's nerves. She couldn't escape the feeling of being watched, the weight of unseen eyes following her every move. The not guilty verdict had been a Pyrrhic victory, a hollow shell offering no solace, no true closure. It had only served to amplify the silence, the chasm that separated her from the world and, more importantly, from herself. One rainy afternoon, a letter arrived, bearing no return address, its crisp white envelope stark against the dark mahogany of her desk. Inside, a single photograph lay nestled amongst the folds of heavy, cream-colored stationery. It was a grainy image, poorly lit, but undeniably familiar. It depicted David, standing in the shadow of a towering skyscraper, his face partially obscured by the downpour, a single tear tracing a path through the grime on his cheek. Beneath the photograph, a single sentence, typed in a stark, almost impersonal font, "They know." A chill deeper than the autumnal air seeped into Sarah's bones. They, who were they? The implication sent a wave of nausea crashing over her. Had someone uncovered the truth, the intricate web of deceit she had so carefully spun? Had David's sacrifice been in vain? The question hung heavy in the air, thick with unspoken dread. Panic tightened its icy grip around her heart. She reread the sentence, each word a dagger piercing her carefully constructed defenses. The implications were staggering, her carefully orchestrated escape, her hard-won freedom, all threatened by this single, cryptic message. Was this a threat? A warning? Or something far more sinister? The memory of the trial replayed in her mind, a torturous loop of questioning, of close calls and near misses. Had she truly escaped detection? Or had she merely been playing a game of cat and mouse with a far more cunning adversary? The thought sent shivers down her spine, a primal fear threatening to consume her. She reached for her phone, her fingers trembling as she dialed Mark Corbin's number. It went straight to voicemail, the automated message a stark reminder of the distance that had grown between them. Mark, her former associate, now her enemy, was the only one who could possibly shed light on this mystery. He was a master manipulator, a man who lived in the shadows, and his silence was more unsettling than any confession could have been. Days turned into sleepless nights, each hour an agonizing exercise in suspense. Sarah found herself replaying every conversation, analyzing every action, searching for clues, for a hint of an explanation. The city, once a symbol of her ambition, now felt like a hostile environment, a labyrinth of potential threats. She found herself avoiding public places, her paranoia growing with each passing day. Then came another letter. This one contained a series of encrypted messages, a puzzle designed to taunt and unsettle. Each message was a fragment of a larger truth, a piece of the jigsaw puzzle that formed the horrifying picture of her past. It spoke of betrayals, of hidden agendas, of a conspiracy far more elaborate and dangerous than she could have ever imagined. She sought the help of Elias Thorne, a renowned cryptographer and a reluctant ally. Thorne, a man shrouded in mystery himself, agreed to help her decipher the messages, but only under his terms. He was as enigmatic and untrustworthy as Mark Corbin, but his sharp intellect was her only hope in navigating this new, treacherous landscape. He worked late into the night, deciphering the cryptic messages, each revelation deepening the pit of fear in Sarah's stomach. The encrypted messages revealed a network of clandestine operations, a hidden world of powerful individuals operating outside the bounds of the law. They were pulling strings from the shadows, manipulating events from behind the scenes, their reach extending far beyond the courtroom drama. And Sarah, unknowingly, had become a pawn in their complex game. The messages revealed a connection to a long-dormant case, one that involved the very foundations of the financial institution at the heart of her trial. It was a Pandora's box of secrets, a trove of information powerful enough to unravel the entire system. Suddenly, the not guilty verdict wasn't a victory but a dangerous invitation, a reckless gamble. Her freedom, it turned out, was a fleeting illusion. The truth, as Thorne revealed it piece by piece, was far more devastating than the accusations that had been leveled against her in court. She had been a pawn in a much larger game, manipulated by unseen forces, her life a carefully orchestrated performance. The realization was a crushing blow, a revelation that left her breathless and utterly exposed. The legal battle was over, but the true fight for her life had just begun. Her past, once a carefully crafted narrative, was now unraveling before her eyes, revealing a web of deceit so intricate, so terrifying, that she wondered if she had ever truly known who she was. The city that had once symbolized her ambition and success now felt like a suffocating cage, a place where shadows lurked and danger was always just around the corner. Sarah found herself alone, adrift in a sea of uncertainty, with no one to trust and no clear path forward. The victory in court had been a fleeting illusion, a momentary respite before the storm. The weight of the truth bore down on her, crushing the hope that had begun to flicker within her. The reckoning, it seemed, was far from over. It had merely begun a new, far more dangerous chapter. The fight for her survival had just started, and this time, the stakes were far higher than anything she had ever faced before. Her life, once again, hung precariously in the balance. The courtroom was eerily silent, the hushed whispers of the previous days replaced by a profound stillness. The judge's gavel, once a symbol of authority and finality, now felt like a distant echo in Sarah's memory. The not guilty verdict, a word that had once resonated with a fragile sense of relief, now tasted like ash in her mouth. It was a hollow victory, a temporary reprieve in a war that raged on within her. The weeks that followed were a blur of strained smiles and forced normalcy. She tried to resume her life, to pick up the pieces of her shattered existence, but the cracks remained, a constant reminder of the chasm that separated her from the world she once knew. Sleep offered little escape, the nightmares relentless, the faces of her accusers, and her own, haunting her dreams. The city, once her playground, now felt like a prison, its glittering lights mocking her solitude. Her apartment, once a sanctuary of ambition and success, now echoed with emptiness. The meticulously crafted facade she had painstakingly constructed, layer upon layer of carefully chosen details, crumbled before her eyes. The expensive artwork, the sleek furniture, the panoramic view of the city skyline, all felt like props in a play she no longer wished to perform. Each object held a memory, a whisper of a past she was desperately trying to bury. Elias Thorne's cryptic messages continued to arrive, each one a chilling revelation, a fragment of a truth so vast and terrifying that it threatened to consume her. The conspiracy he uncovered was a tangled web of deceit, a labyrinthine plot involving powerful individuals and long-forgotten crimes. The financial institution that had been the focal point of her trial was only the tip of the iceberg, a seemingly insignificant player in a far larger, more sinister game. Thorne, himself a man shrouded in mystery, remained her reluctant ally, his motivations as enigmatic as his past. His assistance was invaluable, his expertise essential in navigating the treacherous terrain of the conspiracy, but his detachment, his almost clinical approach to their shared peril, was a constant source of unease. He was a master of shadows, and she often wondered if he was a savior or another player in the deadly game. One evening, as rain lashed against the windows of her apartment, Thorne arrived, his face etched with a grim determination. He placed a thick file on her desk, the weight of it a physical manifestation of the burden they shared. Inside were documents that revealed a decades-old conspiracy, a web of illicit transactions and illegal activities reaching the highest echelons of power. Sarah's trial, she realized with a sickening lurch, had been nothing more than a carefully orchestrated distraction, a pawn in a game far bigger than she could have ever imagined. The documents detailed a complex network of offshore accounts, shell corporations, and coded messages, each piece of the puzzle meticulously crafted to conceal the truth. The financial institution at the heart of her trial, it turned out, had been a mere conduit, laundering billions of dollars for a clandestine organization that operated in the shadows, pulling strings from behind the scenes. And she, unknowingly, had stumbled upon their secrets. The realization was a crushing blow, a devastating revelation that shattered her fragile sense of peace. The guilt gnawed at her, a constant reminder of the lies she had told, the compromises she had made. She had played the game, skillfully maneuvering her way through the legal labyrinth, but she had done so at a price. The victory had been hollow, a Pyrrhic win that came at the cost of her integrity, her sense of self. The aftermath wasn't a clean break, a simple resolution to the courtroom drama. Instead, it was a prolonged, agonizing reckoning, a slow unraveling of the truths she had buried deep within her. The weight of her past, once meticulously concealed, now pressed down on her, threatening to suffocate her. She was haunted by the faces of those she had wronged, the innocent caught in the crossfire of her ambition. The legal battles were over, but a different kind of war had begun, a war within herself, a battle against the shadows of her past and the haunting uncertainty of her future. She had won her freedom, but at what cost? Had she truly escaped the grasp of the conspiracy, or was she merely a temporary pawn, awaiting her next move in this deadly game? Sarah's life had irrevocably changed. The vibrant, ambitious woman who had once strode confidently through the city's bustling streets was gone, replaced by a shadow of her former self, a woman haunted by the ghosts of her past and the constant fear of her future. The city lights, once a symbol of her ambition, now felt like cold, distant stars, reflecting the vast emptiness within her. The quiet hum of the city, once a comfort, was now a constant reminder of her isolation, a stark contrast to the deafening silence that echoed within her own heart. The victory had been hollow, a fragile illusion masking a deeper, more insidious reality. The reckoning, she realized, was far from over. It was, in fact, just beginning. And as the city lights blinked and dimmed around her, she knew, with a chilling certainty, that the fight for her survival had just begun. The game, it seemed, was far from over. The consequences of her choices, of the intricate web of deceit she had woven, would continue to haunt her for years to come, a constant reminder of the price of ambition and the fragility of freedom. The echoes of the courtroom, of the whispered accusations and the tense silence, would forever resonate within her, a haunting soundtrack to her life. The truth, like a relentless tide, continued to wash over her, eroding the fragile foundations of her carefully constructed world, leaving behind a vast and unsettling emptiness. The fight for her sanity, for her very soul, was far from over, it had only just begun. And as she stared out at the city lights, she knew that the journey ahead would be long, perilous, and utterly alone. The price of her survival, she realized with a sinking heart, was far greater than she could have ever imagined.